All right, welcome back to the Badass Lifter podcast. This episode is going to be about why beginner lifters can't just copy expert lifters to get stronger. Now, I kind of get the idea of where you might be coming from if you do this already, where you see someone that you admire or is super strong. Maybe it's someone at your gym, maybe it's your favorite, Instagram fitness person or TikTok fitness person, and you see them and you're like, wow, they're super strong and like they share their workouts. Why can't I just take their workouts for myself and I can become strong just like them? So I kind of understand where you're coming from here. And we're going to kind of talk about like why that isn't the case and what your approach to training as a beginner should be. And also we're going to talk about like what can you take from the experts, because there are still things to learn there. We just can't take their workouts in full for ourselves. And there's just like a few reasons for why that is. The first one is that honestly, just like what they are doing might not actually be what they are doing. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So a lot of fitness influencers online, they'll share workouts, but that doesn't mean that that's the workouts that they're doing. Even if they say that they are. I know it's shocking that a fitness influencer could lie to their fans online for their own personal gain. But sometimes it's just content. Sometimes it's just a random workout. And so, for the first reason is that like, that might not even be their workout. And, I'm not here to call names or anything, but I definitely know people who put up workouts more as like inspiration or just as like a new thing to post, and they say it's their workout when in reality it's just not. So that's like reason number one, is that like the workout they're doing might not even be the workout they actually do. So that's the first reason why you shouldn't copy them, because it's not their training. The next reason is that the beginners need to focus on a lot of things, whereas experts need to focus on one very specific thing, or at least it's like very narrowed down to that individual. Experts, to get stronger, really need to major in the minors. They need to focus on very specific things as part of their training, because they are so conditioned, because they already have the muscle mass they need, the strength they need. Their technique is really solid. Like if we're talking about like an expert power lifter or just someone who's strong in general, for them to become stronger, they need to focus on maybe one or two things really hard, and just maintain the rest. As a beginner lifter, you truly need to focus on basically everything. Like you need to focus on increasing muscle mass to get stronger, technique, like form. You need to focus on like the right kind of programming for you, staying consistent. Like your training is going to be in general, more general than experts do, because experts have so much conditioning under them that they can only focus on like one or two things for the most part, as opposed to beginners, which can focus and should focus on multiple things. And so your training is going to have more variables to it, as opposed to their training, which might only have one or two. So that's like the second thing. Three, and this kind of relates back to the second point, is that the lifting that got them to where they are might not be the lifting that they do now. And one of the reasons is that as a beginner lifter, they had to focus on all the general things. But as they progress, their journey has changed. Like even if they are super strong, like the training they're doing now might not be what got them the strength that they have now. And their training program changed over time. Everyone's does. And so we can't just take their program, because they're kind of on like, maybe the ninth version of their training experience, where you're on the first version of your training experience. And so they didn't do the same thing from beginning to end, and neither can you. So that's something to keep in mind. The next point is that individual differences are real. Not everyone can do the same thing. Even people who have the same goals, and not everyone gets to expert level lifting in the same way. Now, there are patterns and trends. Like, if you want to build a big squat, you're going to be squatting. But it doesn't mean that you can do it exactly the way that they are training, because there's just, everyone has different ways to get to expert lifting. They didn't all do the same thing. And so that you can't just take what they're doing and then become an expert because they might have differences that you don't have. An example of this might be that their build is different than yours. Either they have longer or shorter legs, or longer or shorter arms, or they have incredibly muscular legs for their size, or something along those lines, in which case it's all going to affect the training they do, the rate they get stronger, and what their training is going to look like. If I'm working with someone who is really, really built for conventional deadlift over sumo deadlift, we might not do that much sumo deadlifting, whereas someone who, even if they favor one, can benefit from both, is going to have like a mix of sumo and conventional deadlift training, just as like an example. So individual differences, whether that's body type, again, experience, like their level of talent, which we're going to talk about in a second, those are going to change what the program looks like. It would be great. Honestly, it would make my job super easy if I could just like, okay, what are the experts doing? Okay, cool. Let's just give that to all the beginner lifters. That would be super fun. And that would be like super, super easy, but just like not how it works. But I understand people are coming from. It isn't the case. The last one is that expert lifters, whether they admit it or not, tend to have some genetic talent to them. When we talk about the top power lifters or maybe the top lifter at your gym, once you're lifting a certain amount, I think people should be honest with the fact that maybe they were naturally better at this than other people. Now, why does that matter? Because people who are genetically talented at strength training can do unoptimal things and still get good results. That even if their training is not that good, or it's not the best thing they should be doing, they can still get stronger. And they, without even realizing, will think like, well, I keep improving. I must be doing these things right. And they might be. That could be the case. There are people with great genetics who also have really good training. Like both can exist. But there are also definitely people who are just incredibly talented and kind of could do whatever training they wanted to and would get stronger. Those are the people that I find if you copy their training, you're just copying bad training, but without the genetics. And you're almost learning from like an unoptimal experience. And if you're wondering if someone is like genetically talented, that's like going to be hard to tell without like knowing their full journey. But you can safely say that like if you're listening to or you're watching like a top power lifter or a top CrossFit person or top strongman or whatever it is, if they're like at the top of their game, you can assume there's some good genetics there, as well as like some hard work. But you can't really learn from them because their training in some scenarios is like not even that good. They're just really talented at strength. I've worked with a lot of people now, like hundreds of people online at this point. There are some people that like, and we gave them good training regardless. But there are some people who in 3 months time, like are hitting unreal numbers, like truly impressive. And yes, they did good training. Yes, they were consistent. But there was also some talent that exists there. And sometimes you just don't know until you start. And I would say as well as that people who become expert lifters, people usually stick with things that they're naturally good at. And so I would bet good money that most of the experts at the top level have some kind of genetic talent towards them, which means that if you were to do the same journey and training as them, if you're not genetically talented, would not get the same results. I don't want you to listen to this and think, well, if I'm not genetically talented, should I even try? I don't want that to be, because you can still become very strong and you can still be very proud of the accomplishments that you've made. But if you're looking at like, the women who deadlift in the 400s or the men who bench like 300, 400, 500 pounds, there you do get to a point where like genetics has to kind of play a part if your goals are like really high up there. But most people can still become very, very strong, whether they have the right genetics for it or not. You just might not be able to like if your goal is to deadlift 700 one day, then like you're going to need a genetics card. But if your goal is to deadlift in the 200s or 300s, then that's still fair game for you. So don't worry about that. Now, I want to talk as well about like what can we take from the experts? And there's like I think two main things that we can take from it, because it's not all bad. is one, inspiration for your own training. There are people that I follow that like are very genetically talented, expert lifters. I'll never be as strong as they are. An example of this for me is like Brian Shaw, who's like one of the strongest men in the world and has been for some time now. And he's like inspiration for me watching him train. I'm not looking at his training thinking like I too can be like 6'9", 400 and whatever pounds he is, deadlifting 1,000, all that kind of stuff. Like, but he's just like inspiration for me, and that's how I take it. That I think is the first one. The second one is that if every expert does a certain thing, that's probably a good sign that there is something there, where there can be expert lifters like on an individual level that aren't doing very optimal things. And so you can't really look at a singular expert and be like, oh, that expert is doing this, I should do that. That's not really the right approach. But if every expert is doing something, you can probably bet that there is something there to learn from. Kind of an example might be like all expert lifters have some kind of warm up. You too should have some kind of warm up. If you're watching powerlifting kind of stuff and you notice that they're all using a belt to lift more weight, you can probably also use a belt and lift more weight. That's just something to keep in mind as well, is that like, so on an individual level, following your like favorite expert lifter online probably isn't the right route. But if you watch, 8, 10, 12 expert lifters and you notice they're all doing this one thing, that could be a good sign that there is something there. Sometimes experts are majoring in the minors, and so it could be something that you shouldn't focus on at this moment, but you can bet pretty confidently that there's like some level of benefit there, or at least it's something you should do in your training at some point. I hope this was helpful. I understand where people are coming from when they try to copy the experts, because obviously they have the thing that you want, which is like a lot of strength. But there's just, for the reasons that we mentioned, it might not even be their program. The lifting that got them there, it might not be what they're doing now. Beginner lifting is focused on a lot of things, whereas expert lifting is focused on more specific things. And then like just the genetics that plays into expert lifters compared to people who aren't, super genetically talented. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you have any questions about this and like what your training should be like if you are a beginner. Feel free to send me a message on Instagram, TikTok, email, whatever it is. I'm happy to get back to you. And thanks for listening to an episode of the Badass Lifter podcast.